hello one and all to another episode of Deep Lore. You might notice the different ambience today. This isn't going to be a usual conspiracy video, but instead I wanted to supplement your usual viewing experience with a shorter form of video, focusing on something that perhaps has been an investment of more time than you're willing to admit on those quiet nights where you lie awake in bed, just finding some of the strangest and most bizarre topics of information, link after link on your phone. This is Creepy Wikipedia. When the artist grows tired of the paintbrush and acrylics, they may step into different topics that are more niche, and I'm not talking about outsider art, but art that is meant to analyse the human psyche, sometimes in a pretty dangerous way. Today, we're going to be discussing the sobering art piece called Rhythm Zero. Rhythm Zero was the fifth piece of rhythm art done in a 2-year period by artist Marina Abramović. Each piece in her rhythm series was intended to push the boundaries of both art and the human will. Before we get to Rhythm Zero, we must start at the first of the 5, Rhythm 10 in 1973. Rhythm 10 was intended to merge mistakes from the past and the present to pose as a future punishment. Marina sat in a room at a festival in Edinburgh. In this room, there was a large sheet of white paper, 20 knives of different shapes, and 2 cassette recorders. She began by turning on the cassette recorder and grabbing a knife. Her hand was then placed on the paper, with her fingers stretched outwards, and she plunged the knife down in between each of her fingers as fast as she could until she made a mistake and cut herself. When this happened, she would take the next of the 20 knives and start again. Once she cut herself 20 times and thus used each of the knives, she would then play the cassette she just recorded and copy her exact movements as last time. This included the times she slammed the knife down and succeeded in missing her fingers, and the times where she failed and cut her fingers. Once she went through the knives just like the first time, she once again rewound the tape and went through the 20 knives again. After the performance was over and blood was scattered across the paper sheet, she just got up and left. The next year, Marina carried out her next rhythm piece, Rhythm 5, which was thankfully a little less graphic. She set fire to a giant red star representing the communist icon and would jump in and out of it. Towards the end of her performance, she collapsed as a result of the fumes from the petrol and fuel she was burning the star with. The flames were surrounding her and getting close to her body when a doctor intervened and removed her. Later that year, and still carrying the emotions of being angry that she lost consciousness in her last piece, she started to think more about unconsciousness and the inability to control your own body. In the middle of a gallery in Zagreb, Marina carried out her third act in the rhythm series, Rhythm 2. Her piece was divided into 2 sections, the first lasting 50 minutes and the second lasting as long as it could. At the beginning of the first 50 minutes, she took a medication that is used on patients suffering from catatonia, which is a neuropsychiatric disease which causes muscles to freeze in place and results in long periods where the patient cannot move parts of their body. Once she took this medication, her muscles began to contract violently, and while still being completely aware of what was happening, she lost control over her body as her arms and legs would flail about. After the 50 minutes, she had a 10-minute break and then began her second part, where she took a medication typically given to violent schizophrenic patients to calm them down and make them lethargic. This state lasted 5 hours until the medication wore off and the piece ended. Once again, later the same year, in 1974, she conducted her 4th rhythm piece, this time in Milan, entitled Rhythm 4. She wanted to stop what happened in her flaming star piece, that is, the audience helping her, from happening again. To do this, she sat naked in an empty room with only her and her cameraman. The cameraman would film her piece, and then the live feed would be transmitted onto a monitor in another building, where the audience could watch it on screen. She approached an industrial fan, put her face right against it, and opened her mouth in an attempt to breathe in as much air as possible. She wanted to test the limits of her lungs, and by forcing air at an incredibly powerful speed, she hoped it would expand them far more than she could herself. After a while, she went unconscious, and ironically, it was the cameraman the only person in the room that stopped the recording and got help, so her plan to section the audience to stop interfering didn't work. Now we get to the final piece in the Rhythm series, and quite possibly the most risky, Rhythm 0. Up until this point, critics of her art would say that she was only doing it for attention. She was a masochist and would try to do the worst things for publicity. In an attempt to rebuke these claims, she wanted to do a piece where she did absolutely nothing and the audience would make the art. She was in a room full of people. There was a table with 72 objects on, some harmless, like grapes, bread, or sugar, and some dangerous, like nails, razor blades, and a gun with a single bullet. There was a sign on the table that read, "I am the object. During this period, I take full responsibility." This piece would last for 6 hours, where Marina would stand motionless, that is, unless moved by the audience, and would allow whatever they wanted to be done, to be done. The first 3 hours was relatively timid. She was moved into a variety of poses, and some random words were written on her with lipstick. Someone gave her a kiss and offered her a rose. Then it started to get more intense. Someone cut her clothes off with razor blades, and then proceeded to use those blades to cut her skin. Her throat was cut, and someone drank her blood. Sexual assaults happened on her body. Rose thorns were stuck into her stomach. Towards the end of the night, someone loaded the gun and stuck it against her head and got her to hold it. At some point, another member of the audience took it off her and tried to put it aside from the other rowdy audience members. At the end of the 6 hours, she stood up, snapped back into her usual personality, and the audience refused to talk to her, and, almost with a sense of shame, quickly left the building without looking back. With no prompt, the audience, fully knowing there would be people recording and taking pictures, divulged into aggressive and violent tendencies. It seemed that, much like the Stanford prison experiment, when they felt like the piece was getting boring, or the viewers of the piece were getting restless, they took it into their own hands to try to create the art themselves. The Rhythm series was a strange yet interesting read. The dedication that Marina held to her pieces was insane. She continued to make more pieces, and still does to this day, but none of them really had the same publicity or effects that the Rhythm series did. Thank you for watching this episode of Deep Lore. Hopefully, it's left you wanting to view more content. Please leave a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you haven't done so yet. I would appreciate it if you could share it with your friends. After all, why leave the comfort of the VCR when we're only at the tip of the iceberg? There are still plenty more video cassettes left to watch.